Can you fight and win a nuclear war? It used to be an article of faith that no one could win a nuclear war, that everyone recognized that it was absurd to even think about it, which is why the issue of mutually assured destruction mad made it mad to even think about using nuclear weapons. And that kind of produced this equilibrium all during the Cold War, with the main exception of the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, where we were right very on the threshold of it. But that certainty was in no small measure the reason why that we didn't escalate into nuclear weapons. Now, in the modern era, we have lost a lot of that fear of nuclear weapons and respect for what nuclear weapons can do. And we have this arrogance that is accelerating and escalating into thinking that, well, maybe we can win a nuclear war. Maybe if we can just decimate the enemy's ability to shoot, or if we can figure out some way to defeat their incoming missiles, maybe we can, or maybe we can use smaller nuclear weapons. And that way we can just kind of slide under the threshold and not start this mutually assured destruction. That kind of thinking is extremely dangerous, more so than I can really convey here in the strongest of terms. The lowering of the mental threshold to using nuclear weapons is one of the biggest dangers we face in our world today. And I'm gonna bring in MIT professor Ted Postol, who is an absolute expert on this. We've been talking about these kinds of issues for a lot of times to try and help us make some sense of this. Professor, welcome back to the show.
It's very nice to be back, but it's going to be hard to make sense of it. But we can try to explain the phenomenon.
Yeah, well, I don't know that anybody can make sense of the mentality that is going on in the world today, but we can certainly make sense of the threat and the risk that we face, and that's one of the reasons we're grateful to have you on today. So some people can understand why this is in the news right now. There was an article in the New York Times here a week or so ago where it says Biden approves a secret nuclear strategy, refocusing on the Chinese threat and given the implication that we can win. You read that, and then you also wrote kind of a response piece in Responsible Statecraft in which you said Biden's, quote, new nuclear strategy and the superfuse that sets it off. Can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, what is it that Biden said that so alarmed you, and then what does your article say in response?
Well, what Biden is basically saying is that the nuclear war plans are being adjusted in order to take on both China and Russia in a way that would, in some theory, suggest that the United States can do what's called damage limitation against their nuclear forces. By that, that's a strange and abstract term that basically means that we, the United States, could destroy some significant portion of the Russian and Chinese nuclear forces, which would then allow us to limit damage to the United States from any response they might have. And the reality is that the level of damage you would have to do is simply not possible. In other words, a very small fraction of the nuclear forces of either China or Russia could destroy the United States as we know it. Even a few weapons falling, and there wouldn't be few, there would be hundreds and thousands if things actually went as I would expect. Even a few nuclear weapons would change the whole character of American society. Look at what the 9/11 did to the whole fabric of American society. We went into a bizarre mode of expecting any incident that occurred on the street. The press was saying it's a terrorist attack, or we're looking into whether it's a terrorist attack. All kinds of people had their rights, civil rights, curtailed. That was for an attack that was terrible and almost, absolutely horrifying, but not even a pinprick relative to what would happen if a single nuclear weapon went off on an American city. forget about hundreds of them or tens of them. I mean, these nuclear weapons are extraordinarily destructive. And
Well, so now
people,
what
go
is
ahead.
the logic behind it, Professor? If you can tell me, and from the Biden's perspective, from the administration's perspective, or the Pentagon, or whoever's actually operating these things, is there any kind of rationale that says no? Actually, we would actually have a chance if things go well. We can do this. What is the basis of their confidence?
There is no basis for the confidence. It's just people on automatic. First of all, one valid one valid criticism of this administration and others actually is that they never think about the next step. In other words, the simple example is we want to get rid of Mr. Putin, but nobody knows what's going to come after him. Or we want to get rid of Mr. Assad, but nobody wants to think.
Or Muammar Gaddafi. Let's go
Or
there.
Gaddafi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How'd
So
that work out?
that's so simple. But in the case of these nuclear weapons, what this idea of damage limitation comes from? It comes from a distortion of valid ideas that exist in conventional war. So if you and I are toe to toe with each other in a conventional war, if you or I could somehow do significant damage to the other's military capabilities during the course of our combat, then we are in a better position to defend ourselves and to also take advantage of our, our found, our momentarily found superiority. So that's like a law from the most basic combat, right down to people fighting with rocks and spears. But when you get to nuclear weapons, the problem is different. When you get to nuclear weapons, you can never do enough damage to your adversary that your adversary does not have the option of doing terrible, in fact, uh, d- causing the death of your society with even a minor successful response. So you cannot win in any of the conventional ideas that people associate with traditional warfare. It's simply the number. It's like talking about dividing infinity by two. It's still not a small number, and
Got it.
and the result is just that the destructive capabilities of these things are so extraordinary that dividing by two doesn't make a difference, or 10, or even 100, or 1,000.
Yeah.
Hey, Ted, can we ask you, Ted, because your microphone is still, it's fading in and out. Can we
Yes.
can we resort to your laptop microphone instead?
Well,
Would that be
absolutely. We can try that. Let me try that.
And because what you're saying is too important and we don't want to waste it.
Yeah, that's not.
We just don't hear you yet. So now you've successfully disabled your microphone. Let's see if we can get the laptop to microphone to take over. I don't know if you've literally unplugged it sometimes.
Yeah, Ted. I tell you what, Ted. Why don't you go out and then come back into the channel here, and in the meantime,
let me try to do this.
Oh,
Okay,
there you go.
Right back.
I got you.
You got me?
You're back.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
You can. Yes. And then, do you hear us, Ted?
I have no problem.
1, 2.
Okay.
Oh,
very good.
Okay, good.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Just had a little bit of technical glitch. Got to work it through. So I want to kind of, before we get into your article and what you wrote, and I want to kind of lay the foundation to why some of this is really important and why there's really such alarm, or there should be a lot of alarm in terms of what's been going on in the Russia-Ukraine war. So with Biden's announcement of here and us continuing to work on nuclear weapons in these areas, and this strategy to contain both China and Russia potentially, there are expected reactions to this, and there's another side of this. So I'm going to go first of all because we're going to see a little bit of an evolution here. I'm going to show you what Putin said regarding his nuclear weapons and his doctrine last December, and note carefully what he's saying about his willingness to work with the U.S. on any kind of limitations. Watch this.
The first nuclear warheads have been delivered to the territory of Belarus, but just the first ones. This is the first batch. The use of nuclear weapons undoubtedly is theoretically possible for Russia. For Russia, it is possible if there is a threat to our territorial integrity, independence, and sovereignty, to the existence of the Russian state. We have more of these weapons than NATO countries do. They know that, and they keep telling us to start negotiations on reductions. Well, you know what? They can shove it.
So, the whole issue about kind of having any reductions, which is supposed to have been a thing, the United States going all the way back to Reagan, that we want to have reduction of nuclear weapons. Now he's saying, yeah, y'all can forget about that. We're not going to do anything of that sort. And then you also see him in there talking about the potential use and his nuclear doctrine. He's emphatically wants to say, I've got one. So now you were talking a minute ago that he made a point in there also that they have more than we do, et cetera, which seems to get into your comment there about if the U.S. thinks that it can take out all of their capabilities before they're launched is just a foolish thing because they've just got too many.
Well, I think the fact that they have more than us is pretty much largely irrelevant. I can understand why he says that because he's trying to have a political impact in his comments. And the people he's talking to, who really don't know very much, think that more is somehow better. And it's that same mentality that makes you think that if you can destroy some of an enemy's nuclear weapons, you're somehow going to escape the consequences of a nuclear war. So it's very clear to me from having listened extremely carefully whenever he has talked about nuclear weapons, that he understands that more is meaningless. I'm sure he understands that. But he also is very concerned, if you listen to him very carefully, he's also concerned about what he judges, and incidentally, I agree with them, what he judges about the naivete and ignorance of the people he's talking to. So there's some combination of factual statements being made just to underscore the situation and other statements that are also factual but not relevant, and he understands they're not relevant. I'm just quite sure that he knows it doesn't matter whether he has many less or many more, because the amount we have is so large that it doesn't really matter. Once the house is totally full and overflowing, it doesn't matter that you have more.
Right. Especially with the yields that some of these weapons have in comparison to what happened in 1945, for example. Okay, so that was December of 2023. Now this past June, so around 6 months later, the war has continued on to escalate. Now that you have the U.S. giving authorization at this point, when he's going to make this comment, to use Western weapons, long-range missiles into Russia, and so now he's feeling a little bit more of the pressure from the West, from the these 50 nations that have banded together to help the Ukraine side, and he gets a little bit more proactive. And he's talking here about some reports that were coming out at that time that many in the West are talking about developing much smaller, lower yield weapons because they have a lower threshold to use, which he addressed.
New elements are emerging. At least we know that a potential adversary is working on this, related to lowering the threshold for using nuclear weapons. In particular, explosive nuclear devices of extremely low power are being developed, and we know that in Western expert circles, ideas are circulating that such means of destruction could be used, and there is supposedly nothing particularly terrible about it. Maybe it's not terrible, but we must pay attention to this, and we are paying attention. This is why I made the statement that we are thinking about possible changes to our strategies.
And a preemptive strike.
We don't need a preemptive strike for now, because with a retaliatory counterstrike, the enemy will be guaranteed to be destroyed.
So do you have any idea what he's talking about there from the Western side, where people are saying, hey, let's have small yield nuclear weapons because then maybe we could use them and it wouldn't have an all-out nuclear war?
Well, I think that there is an argument that people are making. I completely disagree with them. Incidentally, one of my former students, a very talented student who I hold in very high regard, has been one of the people arguing that nuclear weapons could be used because they could be made smaller and used in ways that limit some of the immediate collateral, what's called collateral consequences. And I completely disagree with that argument because using a nuclear weapon is not simply a physical decision. All that people are going to know is if you use a nuclear weapon is that it was nuclear. And there's a continuum of possibilities that you can use. I wrote a little paper. I could maybe sometime in the future, we could go through some of it, where I postulated a very low yield nuclear attack on a mechanized battalion, attempting a breakthrough in the war in Ukraine. I wrote it up. Nobody was interested at the time, but people who did read it thought it was horrifying. And it was an extraordinarily low nuclear weapon. It's a 1 kiloton thermonuclear weapon. And I went through intentionally, because people never do this, I went through all the physical effects. The people dying from radiation exposure, the fires that would happen, even though the range of the effects would be considered small relative to other nuclear weapons of higher yield. I showed that they were quite consequential. And I can tell you that, it's very easy, if a weapon like that were used on a battlefield, let's imagine it was used, the first question that would come to your mind if you had this weapon used against your forces would be, is that the only weapon they're going to use? What's next? Your forces would be responding too. The people who are behind the follow-on forces, who are behind the forces that were hit, they're going to be in a total panic. They're going to say, when is our turn? When are we going to get hit? The fact that one weapon was used and it was low yield would be taken as only an indication that things are beginning to happen. The political decision makers would know nothing about what could be going on. So the fact of the situation would escalate due to the social and political pressures and the unknowns. It would escalate almost instantly. And of course, if you felt that you needed to respond rather quickly, that would almost certainly result in a counterstrike. And how do what kind of counterstrike would it be? Against who? Against what forces? The dangers of using a low yield warhead are indistinguishable from using a higher yield warhead. I was very interested when Putin was talking about his tactical nuclear warheads, because he actually quoted a yield, and I'm sure he knows what he's talking about. He said the tactical nuclear warheads that at least he was thinking of at the moment were 75 kilotons. That's a hell of a warhead. That's going to do a lot of damage. And I wrote this paper about a 1 kiloton warhead. And let me tell you, everybody who read it was overwhelmed. They said, you can't deal with, this is horrifying. This will result in an escalation. The fact that the yield of the weapon is lower is indistinguishable from the fact that it's nuclear.
Yeah.
And that it's one of many nuclear warheads that could be used. And it's the beginning of a chain of escalation. And that's what people are mostly afraid of. If I were to tell you just about the physical consequences of an ultra low yield nuclear weapon, I could present it in a way that says, well, it's not the worst thing that could ever happen. And it would be in some sense correct from a purely physical point of view.
Right.
But if you're using it when you're in a military conflict with everybody who has got their nuclear weapons in their holsters, ready to use them the moment they feel threatened with your nuclear weapons, that's a chain of escalation that's unstoppable. There's a reason that every game that that's socially played with decision makers, where tactical nuclear weapons are used, the game always escalates into a total nuclear war. Doesn't matter that it's a small nuclear weapon or a big nuclear weapon. The tactical nuclear weapon just immediately starts a chain reaction that nobody knows how to deal with or stop.
And so that really that illustrates one of the bigger problems that we have here, because you have on the United States / the Western side, we're talking about, updating our nuclear doctrine. Maybe we're going to try this, or we're going to preempt or block their ability to respond. Or so we say we have this, secret, new strategy that's going to do that stuff. Then you also have the talk, like we just mentioned, about maybe the lower yield stuff that would be easier to use and lower the threshold. And of course, that has a consequence. You've talked about some of the political things that happen literally on the ground, but now even in the conceptual phase, there is a response. So you saw that escalation of really rhetoric from Putin from December to June. Well, now then, since he made that one, you had the Ukrainian offensive into Russian territory, the first time since 1941, which Lavrov later said, oh, well, of course, that was done with the approval of the United States. They don't do that kind of thing by themselves. Whether it was or wasn't is irrelevant. That they believe that it was is very relevant. And as a result, Lavrov then said this.
Americans have this direct association, these conversations, this talk of a world war. They think that if this happens, it would only concern Europe, which is a very showing thing that reflects the mentality of those geopolitical strategists in the US, because they are confident that they will just be safe across the ocean. And in this situation, one has to understand that we have our own doctrine, a doctrine of using nuclear weapons, among other things, and we are now making adjustments to this doctrine.
So does that give you concern when you hear Russia talking about adjusting their nuclear doctrine in light of the battlefield developments?
Well, what Sergei Lavrov is saying there, and revealing, I don't mean revealing in a secret way, but is supporting my concern that the Russians are very concerned that the Americans don't have an understanding. The American political leadership does not have an understanding of what they're playing with. So what he's basically saying is, I'm dealing, let me put it in more blunt, since I'm never known for my political acuity. What he's saying is these dummies have no idea what they're dealing with, and they somehow think that they're going to escape the consequences of something that escalates into a general nuclear war. He's saying that these guys are idiots, much more politely and diplomatically. And I'm afraid I agree with him. These people do somehow think that, this is a game. It's not a game. The reason I found myself on your program and others, which didn't happen before, probably for good reasons, is I, as you may recall, started screaming at the top of my lungs about this attack by the Ukrainians on this early warning radar.
Yeah.
This Russian early warning. Now, the reason I was so concerned about it, and other people didn't realize or didn't appear to understand why it was so dangerous and provocative, was because of the importance of that radar to Russia's early warning nuclear retaliation capability. And if you don't understand how important it is, then you do things that can get you into, a terrible catastrophe. And I believe, and I said so at several times during my discussions and in writing, that nobody in the White House understood how dangerous this fooling with this radar was. I don't think any of them knew what was, and I have personal experience with people in the White House from earlier years that convinces me that none of them knew anything about this until it started getting shoved down their throats to the discussion that occurred on this internet and other channels and from other people. Because these people had no idea about our own early warning capabilities, nor do they know anything about Russia's early warning. They think there's some kind of, they think it's like a television program where they look down in someone looks down in a satellite and says, oh, these guys are in the desert and they're running around, and you see these tents they're going to, like people have that kind of understanding of what's going on in the world. People have no understanding of what's going on in the world on short notice. Anyone who I mean, all you have to do is look at a president. I've brought this up many times, but I think it's a perfect example. Look at George Bush when the World Trade Center was hit. He had no idea what was going on. I don't blame them on him because nobody had any idea what was going on. No, if we had any idea what was going on, we would never have grounded every airplane in the sky. But we didn't know. So we didn't know if there were 100 airplanes. I remember I was in Washington at the time, preparing for a talk, and that evening, and I remember watching this on television, saying, "Oh my God, are there 10 planes in the sky? Are there 100? What are we dealing with? How would the United States government know any better?" And you don't know anything when something like this happens, and it's just not possible to collect info. There are no systems in the world, and probably never will be, that can tell you about all these evolving uncertainties when something horrendous happens and you don't know what else could next happen.
Now, I want to move, Ted, to the article that you wrote for Responsible Statecraft. So given all the stuff that we've talked about here and your existing concerns, what is the primary reason why you wrote this? And I wonder if you could kind of fill us in a little bit on some of your conclusions.
Well, when I saw this article in the Times, it was, I've been talking about the fact that the United States has been preparing for this kind of so-called secret nuclear strategy for a couple of decades now. We've been working on this. This just didn't happen overnight. Biden and his people like Blinken and Jake Sullivan, they have no idea what's going on. So someone comes to them with an upgraded plan. The upgraded plan has been in the works for 20 years. The upgrade requires a certain kind of upgrade to the nuclear arsenal. That has been going on at a super secret level for about 20 years. It's a thing I call the superfuse because I think it dramatizes what this device does. And it's put in an existing nuclear warhead, and it increases the capability of the warhead to destroy a Russian or a Chinese missile in a nuclear in a hardened silo by a factor of 2 to 3, depending on how you count, the capability. By 2 to 3.
And you have some slides that can depict that, right?
Yeah. Let me. Gary? Why don't you put on slide 4 first? I'll show you just so people understand what we're talking about. This is a slide that shows a very large SS-18 missile. It's the last generation heavy ICBM. The Russians are replacing this heavy ICBM with another heavy ICBM that, for all purposes, in this context, looks the same. And this ICBM is typically housed in an underground concrete and steel silo. The missile is shown on the left on its own, and on the right, it's shown in a capsule, which is inside concrete and steel walled cylindrical shells. The capsule itself is suspended on springs, and the silo is supposed to protect the missile from the consequences of the explosion of a nuclear weapon that's very close to the silo that would be intended to destroy the missile while it's still in the silo, sort of preemptively destroy the missile. Now, if we look at slide 6, we see two renditions of how the silo could be attacked. On the left side, there are two insets, one on the left, one on the right. On the left, there's a green upside down cup structure that defines a volume around the missile silo, where if a nuclear weapon detonates inside that volume, it will create strong enough effects of various kinds that the missile will be destroyed in its silo. So it's kind of a lethal volume. So the name of the game is to place warheads inside that lethal volume. Now, if you have a regular incoming warhead and it's going to land on the ground and then detonate, then what you see is a bundle of lines extending from the upper left down to the ground. And at the bottom of each of those lines is a little yellow circle with a brown circumference around it. And those are impact points, for purposes of illustration. Now you notice that because of the inaccuracy of the incoming warheads, some of these impact points fall short of the missile silo, and others short of the lethal volume, and others fall long of the missile lethal volume. Now it turns out you can invent a fuse that would the inset on the right shows you how that fuse works. If you look at the upper left corner, you see a little ellipse that is slightly tilted to the left. And at the center of that ellipse is the location where the warhead would be at a specific time on its trajectory if it's going to land right above the target. Now, if the fuse looks at its altitude before it arrives, and it's higher than the altitude is higher, you see from the axis of the ellipse, it will not only be higher, but it will be slightly behind where it would have been if it was on the intended trajectory. So because the time and the trajectories are perfectly known, what they should be are perfectly known, when I measure that altitude, I know immediately that I'm slightly behind where I would be. My distance is slightly longer to the top of the silo. And I also know that I can detonate inside that volume if I detonate a little later, a little earlier. And what I do is I take the intended trajectory and I aim at the back of the lethal volume, at its far back. And if you look at all the geometry of the detonation points, I can essentially compress all the detonation points into that lethal volume when many of them would fall outside the lethal volume. We don't have to worry about all the details. I can describe that for people who are interested. But basically, I collect everything I'm shooting into the volume. So if we then look at, let's look at slide number 10. If we were to look at slide number 10, in fact, let's do something better. Let's look at slide 11, because we don't need all the details. If we look at slide 11, the probability of kill with a normal fuse on a, I'm sorry, I'm going to do it. I'm going to trick you again. Let's look at slide 13. Unfortunately, I put too much stuff in the analysis here. All right, so here's a 100 kiloton war. So this is the W76 warhead against the 2000 PSI hard target, which is harder than actually we know the Russians assess their own silos to be 1500 PSI hard. We know that from documents we obtained during the Gorbachev era, when there was a lot of glasnost. We have documents from an ICBM designer. So they assess the hardness of their silos at 1500 PSI. So this is a 2000 PSI target, a Russian silo. And if we assume we have the old fuse, the fuse where things fall outside, short and long, the blue curve below shows the probability that the warhead will detonate close enough to the silo to destroy it. And it's a little bit over 0.85 or so. And the red curve above shows the probability of killing this silo if you use the superfuse. It's 0.99, it's essentially 1. If you do some simple probability estimates and you say, let me use 2 of the warheads with a conventional silo, so with the 0.85 or so, 0.84 probability of kill, and I use 2 of those warheads, one after the other, I still can't get the same kill probability that I get with the single superfuse armed warhead. So I've essentially doubled the killing capacity in terms of the number of warheads I need to do a given level of damage, essentially take out all of these silos. That's a fantastic increase in my firepower. Now, to make matters even worse, is this particular 100 kiloton warhead is the most numerous warhead we have in the American arsenal. We're carrying maybe 4 of those warheads on a typical submarine launched ballistic missile at sea now, because arms controls constraints have caused us to download to 4 warheads per missile. Each of those missiles can carry up to 12 of these warheads. So from the Russian point of view, at any time when arms control ends, and the United States is not exactly a reliable treaty partner. We withdrew from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. We withdrew from the Open Skies Treaty. We withdrew from the ABM Treaty. So when the Russians look at this, they say, these guys can just say, sorry, we've changed our mind. Now, normally you would have had higher yield, heavier warheads known as the W88 warhead used on these particular silos. But you only have about 400 of those, while you have 1,600 of the 100 kiloton warheads. So all of a sudden, these 400 warheads, which are higher yield, are now available to use elsewhere. And only less than half of the 100 kiloton warheads take care of all the Russian and the Chinese silo-based missiles that you want to shoot at. So you have all kinds of extra warheads. So you've increased your firepower, your effective warfighting firepower, in spite of the arms control constraints that you agreed to because of this technological innovation. So if you go to slide 16, I can show you, I can take this W88 warhead. Oh, is it slide 16? 15, I'm sorry. Slide 15, giving Gary some exercise. If I look at I can take this W88 warhead, and if I assume the command center is the Capitol building, you can see that if the Capitol building were 150 meters underground, and it was a command center, I could still destroy it with a near surface detonation of this higher yield warhead, which I have hundreds of now. I can go after all these command centers. Maybe there's some that I still can't reach.
Wow,
But
150 meters below the surface, it could take out.
Yep.
That's just to put that in context, that's a football field and a half deep. That's some exceptional firepower there.
Well, there are shelters that are deeper, we're told. We have them and the Russians have them. But how do you communicate after you've been hit? They're all, it's very unclear how these command centers could function if they were hit a bunch of times, because you're mapping out everything that you can find that looks like it's a communication line out of the center and anything that looks like an antenna. So it's not clear that these communication centers could be destroyed by simply using multiple warheads and going after everything around them that, could be a communication line of some type or a tunnel.
And so now Ted, when I see stuff like this, like we talked about a minute ago, there's always an action and then a counteraction. And I know one of the things in your article there was about the Poseidon submarine or unmanned drone, underwater drone or whatever. I want to show people a little bit about what that is, and then I wonder if you could tell us about what the vulnerability is for the United States. Watch this.
The Poseidon nuclear missile. The NATO is suspecting that Russia is in fact testing the Poseidon missile. The super torpedo is an unmanned underwater vehicle, more like an underwater drone. And reports say that it is capable of traveling up to 10,000 kilometers in terms of distance underwater before exploding near the coast, causing what is being described as a radioactive tsunami. In the month of March in 2018, Russian President Vladimir Putin had unveiled new super weapons. The Poseidon missile was one of them. The intercontinental nuclear-powered and the nuclear-armed autonomous torpedo adds a whole new dimension to nuclear deterrence. Now, its speed is expected to be about 70 to 108 knots, making it almost untraceable. And it could also operate at a depth of almost 1,000 meters, making it almost unreachable as well. Now, experts say that it is completely a new type of a weapon that can be launched from even under polar ice caps. And this, of course, will make the Western navies to develop new countermeasures that at this point of time that they presently lack.
So what's the risk of this missile to the United States? I'm sorry, this underwater missile torpedo.
Well, I think it's, why don't we go to slide 20, since you set me up, that's great, as you guys always do. The question you might ask is, what is Putin's response to U.S. preoccupation with all this nuclear war fighting? Well, in the next slide, slide 21, we see that response. This is a photograph taken from a Russian television camera, which the shoulder you see on the lower right is a soldier who's sitting in a room with Putin. And supposedly, I mean, this is a joke, of course, this is Putin's joke on the West. This soldier is describing this underwater unmanned vehicle, and he has this color diagram out there, and Putin is sitting there, and the cameraman looks over the shoulder of the soldier, and you get this image of this unmanned vehicle. And then Putin says, "Oh," with a smile on his face, "Oh, I guess our secret's out." Like he invited this television crew in to watch him get a super secret briefing about this new super weapon. Well, it was intended for the same reason that we saw Lavrov saying, "I'm not sure you guys understand what we're talking about. I'm not sure you guys understand that you are directly in the line of fire too." Just as you see Putin saying that all the time. It's not because they're afraid of us in the sense that we can do something. It's because they're afraid of our ignorance and our recklessness and our lack of responsible knowledge in our own political leadership about our own weapons. So if we go to slide 22, just to show slide 22. This is, my guess. It's a pure guess about the size of the nuclear weapon that could be inside this underwater vehicle. We know the dimensions of this vehicle. So when someone tells you it could be a 1 mega, you see in the West, people say it's a megaton weapon, it's a 10 megaton. Well, we don't know. But I can tell you it could easily be a 100 megaton weapon. It doesn't have to be one or two, because the question is, what could fit in that volume, and does it weigh more than what this vehicle can carry? And the answer is, a Tsar bomb could fit in there. This is a 50 megaton bomb that the Russians built and detonated in 1961. So if we go to the next slide, 23, you can see what this Tsar bomb looked like. The upper photograph shows you this bomb. It's about 2 meters in diameter, but it does not have to be 2 meters in diameter. The details of the bomb design are well enough known that we know it can easily be made 1.5 meters in diameter. No problem at all, because we know how it was designed and its design features. So all we need to do is look at the next slide to get a sense of the gigantic amount of damage that one of these bombs could do. So just this morning I did this for myself. I put together a slide 25. This shows you a Google image of New York City, and in the next slide, I show what a Tsar bomb detonating in the harbor of New York might look like. This is only one point in the detonation. The actual weapon would rise to an altitude of 40 miles over the city. And the yellow kind of circle I put there shows you the area that would be completely destroyed because it would be set on fire by the gigantic thermal flash of that nuclear detonation. So you'd have an area of 4,000 or 5,000 square miles simultaneously in flames. The winds on the ground would be hurricane force. The air temperatures would be above the boiling point of water. There would be no one surviving. This would be an area that would probably not even have much in the way of charcoal left, because the winds would cause probably the near complete combustion of anything that was combustible, because it'd be hurricane force winds and the temperatures would be so high. This is a single such weapon. So if we then go to slide 28, I think that's 28, this shows you what Russia could do to the northeast corridor of the United States if it chose to do it with these underwater vehicles. The yellow areas show you the areas that could literally be burnt up, like the fires that destroyed Tokyo. Doesn't matter that they started with a nuclear weapon; they would be more fierce and more lethal than these fires that destroyed Tokyo. These great bombings that we did during World War II.
Right, and that just kind of underscores really the absurdity of thinking that we can take out an adversary's weapons in their silos, because you can't do anything about an autonomous undersea vehicle. I mean, it can go from anywhere. So that's really part of the problem. And I just wanted to point out here, is I know we're getting kind of close to time here, but this is from the military summary channel just this morning that shows that it's not just that Putin and Lavrov are making comments, but they're now also taking action to give, I guess, feet to their fear. Watch this.
The Russians redeployed their nuclear command centers to Crimea. You remember that, according to information we have, the Russians are right now working to improve their nuclear doctrine, and most likely they will improve the number of cases when they can use the nuclear weapon. And most likely, for these purposes, the Russians brought the nuclear command centers to Crimea just as a part of improvements of their nuclear doctrine. Furthermore, the sources reported that the Russians are about to finish the construction of ground launching systems also for the nuclear weapon. So, telling the truth, summarizing everything, the Russians are improving their nuclear weapon and nuclear carriers massively all over the entire Russia, and they're improving their doctrine. So it seems that the Russians are really planning to use nuclear weapon in the conflict with Ukraine, or at least they're planning to use this if Western countries cross the final red line.
And of course, that's the question. Who knows what that final red line is? And so let me ask you what your opinion is. Do you think that if Russia's taking all these actions in order to really sober us up and wake us up so that we realize the cost of doing this, ergo so we wouldn't, do you think that message is getting through?
Well, I don't know, but let's put up slide 28 again. And what Putin is saying with this Poseidon weapon, and what he said when he first showed the weapon as a joke through a television interview, what he's saying is something very simple. Don't do it. Don't try. Don't even think of it, because everyone is going to be dead. That's what he's saying. He's saying, I'm not going to start it, but if you start it, I promise you I will finish it. That's what he's saying. He will
and
not
that seems
start.
To be matched by Lavrov in his comments, the one the earlier this last week, where he specifically said, "Don't think your oceans are going to save you." I don't remember him ever saying that before.
So these guys are saying, we're not going to start it. We know it's the end of everything. But if you start this, that's what's going to happen. Don't do it. And by deploying these weapons, I absolutely am sure that he has no intention of starting anything with these nuclear weapons. He is basically saying, don't do it, because I will respond. And I've seen him say that in other interviews. I've seen him say, it will be the end of the world if we start using nuclear weapons. He has made it very clear. It will mean the end of everybody. And I know it, and I don't want this to happen. But if you put me in a position where I have no choice and you do it to us, I will do it. You should have no doubt in your mind. So don't do it. That's what he's doing. That's what he's saying.
You know, the operative title of this episode here, can you fight and win a nuclear war? I think that you have conclusively demonstrated, no, you can't. We have extraordinary power in our nuclear arsenal. Russia has extraordinary power in its nuclear arsenal, or China. And if it goes forward, there will be no winners. Russia will not win. Putin will not win. But we will not win either. No one can. All we can do is vaporize each other.
Right. I think that's it.
Under no circumstances should there ever be one done. I mean, this mutually assured destruction needs to come back to the fore where people recognize consciously the extraordinary destructive power here, and that there is no possibility of success. Therefore, it should never, ever be used.
The physical facts say if you try it, it will be the self-destruction of your country and, of course, of a large part of humanity and maybe all of humanity. It's just that simple. These are facts. This is not some opinion of some pointy-headed, academic sitting. I work with these nuclear weapons. I know quite a bit about them. I've studied them. And, I wish the people in the White House had spent some time learning about them instead of all these silly political theories that have no relationship at all to the real world. I'm so fed up with this political science community who talks about all these theoretical, they call it international relations, IR theory. IR to me means infrared, doesn't mean international relations. There are real physical principles that govern the world, and these people need to understand it. And, you know, someone like John Mearsheimer does political science in a way that makes real sense and really adds to our understanding of how the things function in the world. When I look at these other people, it's terrifying to see how little they understand. They're just like monkeys talking. It's frightening.
Truly it is. And as a matter of fact, we actually are going to have John Mearsheimer on tomorrow along with Larry Johnson. So we may try to bring this topic up then that day as well. But listen, all we can do is keep putting on shows like this and bringing you on so that you can graphically show people the catastrophic fear of this, to return a proper fear of nuclear war, which had governed us in the past and had led to people not making stupid decisions or huge risks. We need to reinstitute that so that we don't get to that threshold again, because the day that one nuclear weapon is used, no matter who starts it, the risk will be huge that we go over the edge, and God help us if that ever occurs.
Well, my objective since this attack on that radar has been to scare the hell out of people by telling them the facts. I've focused almost exclusively on facts in all of my discussions. So, I mean, I have obviously given opinions on some things too, but the facts are what I have emphasized. And these are not disputable. So it's about time for people to start bringing them into their thinking about how to deal with the current situation.
Indeed it is. And we thank you very much as always, for coming on today and providing extraordinary clarity on something of monumental importance, not just for our country, but for the world. And we just really hope that people do pay attention.
The world is our laboratory in this case.
Yeah. And so thank you very much. Thank you guys for watching us today. And folks, if there's ever an episode where you want to share this out with people and get the word out there, this is one of them, because this is literally an existential issue for the human race. Because no country is going to win a nuclear war. Let's make sure we never find out. Thank you very much. And we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.